Chipped ham and football. That's what Pittsburgh does. Brian Batko here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, one of our Steelers beat writers. Going to sort of do a post-mortem on the 2023 season. Look ahead to next year a bit today with Andy Benoit, head of football analysis for the 33rd Team. Excellent website covering all things NFL. I lean on them a lot. Before that, he was with Sports Illustrated and actually the LA Rams as a member of their front office and assistant to Sean McVay. How's it going, Andy?
Hey, Brian, it's going well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. A lot more free time and sort of sitting around finding stuff to write now that the Steelers are done. No more trips down to the South Side facility. I know you're probably knee deep in looking at all that went down in the divisional round and turning your focus to the Final Four in the NFL. So thanks for chatting a little bit of Steelers with me as we put a bow on their season. First, this show is presented by Pella. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella. They can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss that further. That's 866-593-1560 to start getting planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Andy, the Steelers got their doors blown off a little bit in Buffalo at least the first half. Let's start with just your overall thoughts on their 2023 season. 10-7, sneak into the playoffs as a 7 seed, get thrown out of the club by Josh Allen and company. Is that about what you expected? Did they make any progress from your vantage point, or was it mostly just a result of tripling down on the Matt Canada experience and turning over a 2?
Well, I think they got better offensively as the season went along. They had a very distinct identity. They were defense and run the ball, which that used to be half the playoff teams. That was their identity, more than half. You know, it's a different NFL now, but they found ways to win in this different NFL by playing kind of a recent old-fashioned style, if you will, 1990s, early 2000s football. And look, within the context of their identity and how they're built to play, and I think Mike Tomlin recognized some of those limitations on offense, how good they were in certain areas on defense. I think within that context, you know, they have a season they can be proud of. They overachieved, and I'm sure, as you know, in the city of Pittsburgh and the history of that organization, 10-7, that's not anything they're going to celebrate there, and the expectations and the standards are higher moving forward.
So if you think they overachieved sort of from the national perspective, I know here in Pittsburgh, after they looked good in preseason and Kenny Pickett was throwing some darts, there was like the optimism meter was creeping up, but that always tends to happen locally. I guess people like you who study every team weren't necessarily there at that point.
Yeah, you make a good point. You know, maybe overachieved is a strong word. I think if you'd asked me at the front of the year, just looking at their roster and kind of the landscape of the AFC, he'd pick a record for this team. 10-7, 9-8, right in that upper middle-ish pack seemed about right. I think they're young in the passing game in certain ways, and that's maybe where you think they overachieved, and by that I mean they overcame some of that youth and inexperience in the passing game, and I think they did do some good things in it as well this year.
Well, on that note, Andy, I'll just ask you: Are you a Kenny Pickett guy? What do you make of him? I mean, second year as the starter, first full season as QB1, it did not go really to plan. He effectively gets benched for the final stretch after his injury in favor of Mason Rudolph. What are your thoughts on Pickett as somebody who, you like I said, you're on every team, and I feel like he's not really a quarterback who gets mentioned a ton in the national stratosphere.
Yeah, he's not. I know that some of the guys that I get to work with at 33rd Team, guys that have won a lot of games in the NFL as coaches, head coaches, coordinators. There are coaches with us that think Kenny Pickett is tremendous, and that if he played, he's a certain kind of quarterback. And so if he played in a highly schemed offense, if you will, let's say a Miami or San Francisco are the best examples, where it's a run pass balance, a lot of motions, a lot of designed reads, or let's say defined reads on early downs, first and second down passing. You know, that kind of offense, I think he would be a very successful quarterback in a system like that. He plays the position the way coaches want it to be played. The question is, you know, Pittsburgh, they've always philosophically, they've been big on 3-by-1 formations. We're going to do a drop back pass game. We'll have some quick game in it like everybody does. But we're going to put a lot on our quarterback. And that worked for a long time when they had Ben Roethlisberger. the question is Kenny Pickett that kind of guy? And they're not running exactly what they did with Roethlisberger, but it's closer to that than it is to being a highly schemed offense. And so that's the discussion. Is Kenny Pickett a guy you can just kind of go out there and play with, or do you scheme it up with him? And I think there are guys in the league, coaches in the NFL that believe if he played in a system where you schemed it up, he would be an excellent quarterback in that kind of system.
That's well said. And I think there's some, encouraging points to be made there, because a lot of Steelers fans who were high on Pickett, or maybe still are, starting to worry a little bit, or wondering how can you still get the most out of him if you do go into 2024 with him as your starter again, which from the sounds of it last week with Mike Tomlin, seems like the Steelers are going to do that. How do you best sort of marry all the good traits and minimize some of the bad that we saw from him? Conversely, are you a Mason Rudolph guy? Like, I'm always fascinated to hear the national, opinions on not just Pickett, but now the way the last month of this season went. Like, what do people make of Rudolph and his sort of mini resurgence, going on a 3-game run to get into the playoffs, and then obviously not being able to outgun Josh Allen, although very few quarterbacks can?
Yeah, Rudolph was pretty solid in those games, and including that Buffalo game in the playoffs. I thought he put the ball where he wanted to put the ball, which, that's another way of saying he's accurate. But accuracy, not just precision, but also the timing of the plays. I thought he executed the way the plays were designed to be executed. He's another guy in the right kind of system. He's going to be serviceable and effective. As far as do we go with this guy? He's been in the league since 2018. We've seen him. He's had chances to be a starter at stretches. My sense is, and I could be wrong, my sense is he's probably a higher end backup quarterback, and he played at a higher end level when they needed him to this season.
Well, I guess the last thing that I'll, sort of ask you about with what went wrong in 2023, or at least what could have been done differently. I mean, what did you make of the Matt Canada NFL experiment overall? Because I feel like there are some smart football minds who watch a ton of tape like you do, who think, yeah, there were plays there were throws to be made that Pickett just didn't make for whatever reason, whereas others are like, everything he was trying to do didn't really translate from the college ranks to the NFL. I mean, are you somewhere in the middle on that? Does he resurface at some point? And did the Steelers just sort of hitch their wagon to the wrong guy for a few years here offensively?
Well, it's with guys like that, and every year there's a few coaches that people just decide that's the coach we're going after. We're going after his job security. And Matt Canada, unfortunately, he was one of the guys that got picked for that this year. And look, if the Steelers were averaging 25, 30 points a game, he wouldn't have been picked. So I'm not saying that anyone's right or wrong. All this stuff with guys like that, all of it exists somewhere in the middle. He could be better. He wasn't as bad as they think. Their run game was better than people gave them credit for. It was more diverse. It wasn't diverse every week. It was a little bit inconsistent in terms of that approach, but there were a lot of things to like about that. They have talented receivers. You could argue, they line up and just kind of, they're simple offensively. That's not an unfair argument, but you could also argue they've got receivers who they expect can win, and you can afford to be simple when you have big guys like George Pickens outside that are one-on-one winners, or route runners at the level of a Deontay Johnson. So there's all kinds of discussions to go back and forth on all that. But, I'll be honest, Brian, I do watch all the film. That doesn't mean I see and know even a huge majority of what's going on. There's a lot that happens in meeting rooms and why coaches are doing what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish, the players they have. All these things are pieces of puzzles that fit in. And, from the outside looking in, we don't have all the information. So you always want to tread lightly when being critical of anyone. Canada, I think there were some good things. There were some poor things. I never watched it, felt like I'm watching a college system, though. Was that his background, or the thinking for your fan base is he's trying to do college things in the NFL?
Yeah, he'd only worked in college, and it's funny, as somebody who I covered Pitt before the Steelers, I wasn't there for the season that he racked up a ton of yards and points for the Panthers right there across the hall from the Steelers, but certainly looked into his background a lot when the Steelers hired him and promoted him. And he always was kind of honest about, I think we have one of the simplest offenses in America. We're trying to win matchups. We might have some concepts that look very complicated or rely on a lot of misdirection. And he was known for the shovel pass and the jet sweep. So some of that stuff was maybe a little foreign for NFL fans to see, but I think he was always consistent in saying, we're going to simplify matters. And that, I think, is why he sort of had that reputation here, fairly or unfairly. And I mean, just there were also some, pointed criticisms about this stuff looks amateurish. He's never done it at the NFL level. Can he even stay a step ahead of the play callers in this league?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Steelers have played a certain way on offense for a long time now. And if you go back and look at their history, even back to Ken Wisenhunt, Bruce Arians, some of those guys, there have been a lot of carryover and similarities from one coordinator to the next. So, which tells me it's part of it's an organizational philosophy. And I don't know this, but just there have been so many different coordinators, and this offense has had so many common variables for how they approach the game schematically. I don't believe that everything's just turned over to the OC and it's all on him. The challenge, Brian, with instituting college concepts in the NFL, and I think the league's done a pretty good job of that with like you mentioned, the jet sweeps, which are pretty commonplace now, the various misdirections and screen concepts. The challenge is in college, the hash marks are really wide. And so when the ball's spotted to one side of the field or the other, there's a lot of space to one side and very little space to the other. And that regulates the way the defense can play. And long story short, because of the extra space, it makes it easier to isolate certain matchups in college. In the NFL, you can isolate one-on-one matchups, but you're not in total control there. The ball's always spotted near the middle of the field because the hash marks are tight. That gives the defense a lot more flexibility for how they can disguise and what they can do schematically. So that's why college coaches don't always just work when they go to the NFL and drop in what they're doing from college. The games are really – college game, pro game are really, really different games. They just look the same because the uniforms look the same and the bright lights on TV look the same. But it's not easy to just take college stuff and put it in the NFL. It's not an A plus B equals C kind of equation most of the time.
Well, on that note, Andy, Mike Tomlin has already said he wants the next offensive coordinator here in Pittsburgh to be somebody with prior NFL experience in that role. So we're going to get into that in just a second. We have more to touch on with Andy Benoit from the 33rd team. But first, a word from Propel Schools. Propel's 13 public charter schools here in Allegheny County build a solid academic foundation for lifelong learning, offer more personalized instruction at every level for your child through their kindergarten through 12th grade journey. Give your children the quality education they deserve. Learn more and apply to Propel Schools by visiting propelschools.org. And a quick message from Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. So, yeah, Andy, I mean, at this point, like I just wrote a big story on the Post-Gazette website. Not big and important, but comprehensive, and a lot of words were spilled out on offensive coordinator possibilities. I'm not going to pretend to know who Mike Tomlin's got his eye on or who they're going to talk to as they start to get into this search. But what do you make of what they should do at offensive coordinator? I thought it was really interesting what you brought up about just kind of the structure of what might work for Kenny Pickett at this point, because I know here in Pittsburgh, it's been a talking point for a while that, like, could Kenny look like Brock Purdy if he was in Kyle Shanahan's offense? Would Brock Purdy look any good if he were in Matt Canada's offense? I know it's not that simple, but do you have any names in mind or even coaching trees in mind that might fit the personnel they've got, or to what you were mentioning earlier, just the philosophy that they seem to have as an organization?
Well, I think the one that you mentioned, that San Francisco one, is a good example. And Brock Purdy, and look, Purdy is a uniquely good fit for how they play there in San Francisco because he is such a good anticipatory passer and he sees things so quickly. And that's why his arm strength, or the quote unquote lack thereof, and I don't think he lacks it as much as people would probably guess, but that's why the arm strength's not a huge deal for them. Same thing with Tua Tagovailoa in Miami. Very similar system right there. So, something like that with Kenny Pickett, where your run game and your pass game really do overlap a lot and the reads are really regulated. It's a progression read system. That kind of thing I think would fit Pickett well, because you get the sense watching him, you've always felt like that is a professional quarterback. He's not back there looking at a million things every snap and you don't know what it's going to be from one play to the next. I do think he would fit that kind of approach well, as far as finding the guys who can run that system. You know, I'd love to know if Mike Tomlin, when he wants an NFL experienced coach, does that mean he wants someone that's called plays before or not, or even been a coordinator before or not? Because if he does, that's going to shrink the pool, of course.
Yeah, I think the question that he had at his presser, Andy, was somebody who's had NFL offensive coordinator experience. Now, I know that some of those guys they don't necessarily have play calling experience, because there's a big difference in this era of offensive-minded play calling head coaches. And I suppose we could have drilled him in on that a little bit more last week. But I get the vibe that he's probably going to want someone who's done both, or else you're still taking a little bit of a chance or a swing with the guy that you would put in that seat.
Yeah, well, and look, these guys somebody has to be a first-time play caller somewhere at some point. Otherwise, your pool string. You know, Dave, we just saw Dave Canales for the Buccaneers, who I think did one of the best jobs in the league this year, given his circumstances, the fact that they couldn't run the ball, how they adjusted what they did. You know, that went extremely well. And if you'd said at the front of the year, Dave Canales, a guy from Seattle who's never called plays before, he's going to realize they can't run the ball very effectively, and they're going to become a shotgun offense midway through. I think you'd say, well, the Bucs are going to go 5-12, and instead they were competitive and almost on the cusp of the NFC Championship game. You know, a lot of these, Mike McDaniel, for example, we just talked about the Dolphins. Mike McDaniel had not called plays in the NFL until he became the Dolphins head coach, and right away, you could probably argue he was one of the absolute very best play callers. Zach Taylor, very similar in Cincinnati. So I think the prior play calling experience, my guess is, without having gone through every guy and done this exercise, my guess is it's overrated. What probably matters is what play callers have you been around. If you worked for a Kyle Shanahan or a Sean McVay like Zach Taylor did, or Dave Canales, being around a lot of good veteran offensive minds in Seattle, Shane Waldron most recently, Darrell Bevell before that. You know, I think that's what you want to take into account with the guy in their background. Now, look, Pittsburgh, their coaching staff, if you look, it's always been a little bit more of a veteran staff. I think Tomlin's got more guys in his 40s, 50s, even some of the guys in the 60s than your average staff. And so if that's something Tomlin values and prioritizes, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it'll be interesting to see how he goes about that. And, you know, we're not going to know everything either, because whoever they pick, they'll say that's the guy they wanted all along, just like
that's universal for every coaching opening in any level of football, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't know that, but you know, the background and the philosophy of the offensive guy, to me, that's what matters most for picking the coordinator. And if he has a play calling experience or not, probably better if he does, but that's a small deciding factor to me.
Yeah, I sort of agree with you that I thought it was interesting he was that transparent about it, because it does roll out a lot of these sort of up-and-comers who, like you said, I mean, you don't know if they can call plays until they get a chance to call plays. So maybe he's just a little, apprehensive about that because of the Matt Canada failed experiment where he'd done it for plenty of years in college, but he'd never done it in the NFL. But yeah, I mean, to your point, and I think I probably said this on this show or in one of my mailbags or something for the Post-Gazette, when you do paint yourself into that corner a little bit, guess what label is going to get applied to the dude you hire? He's a retread. He's somebody who's been in this, and for whatever reason, maybe extenuating circumstances, a team out there decided, we don't want you to be our coordinator anymore. If you got bumped up to a head coach, they decided, we don't want you to be our head coach anymore. So that certainly, trims down the pool. But I guess if Tomlin has his mind set on one sort of prerequisite or another, it'll be interesting to see which way they go.
Yeah, for sure. It will be absolutely interesting to see which way they go.
And you do get to be the sort of head coach of the offense here in Pittsburgh because he's so involved defensively. But like you said, there are organizational tenets that they want everybody to have. No matter if it's Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback, Kenny Pickett, or Mason Rudolph. Andy, thanks so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add on the Steelers front before I let you get out of here?
No, just, I think they're as good an organization as anyone in the NFL. The league's better when the Steelers are doing well. So I don't really root for anyone, but it's hard not to admire the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And this will be a pivotal hire for Tomlin, not just for them, but probably for getting things right for his future. 7 years without a playoff win. They're sort of in that, mediocre middle of the NFL where you don't necessarily want to be. But thanks so much to Andy Benoit of the 33rdteam.com. Make sure you check out what they're doing over there. A lot of former NFL coaches, staffers, players contributing to their website, so you can get a little bit of a different vantage point in analysis on stuff like that. I'm Brian Batko for the Post-Gazette. Thanks as always for joining us on Chipped Ham and Football. We'll have a lot more Steelers content for you throughout the week. Talk to you then.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.